I want to just welcome everyone, and I'm happy to introduce Ann Hamilton, who's president of Lake Park Friends, and she will just welcome us, and then we will hear from Patrick Mullins, Professor Patrick Mullins from Marquette University. He is a multifaceted man, much like Olmsted. His real specialty is the founding era, but he also loves Olmsted. And I like to say that Olmsted, in many respects, extended the values of the founders, because he very much wanted Parks for All People to be the part of our pursuit of happiness, something that he said in the 1865 Yosemite Report. So there's reason to your discipline. So welcome, Patrick, and thank you, Ann.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of this really wonderful conference. As I sat through the conference yesterday, the wonderful day out at Washington Park, I kept being struck about how great it is to be part of this network, and how all day yesterday I kept thinking, wow, we're all doing something together. We're all connected in some way, pursuing, and all of us are available as resources in terms of management of the parks, and also now I can add, and in the pursuit of happiness. Thank you, Dee Dee. So I'd just like to say a few words of thanks, first to Gail Walter for making this program move on, to Milwaukee County Parks, to Dee Dee Petri and the Olmsted Network for all their fabulous work. Leslie, in the back there, you've been fantastic. And in Lake Park, clap, clap, clap. And in Lake Park, I am particularly appreciative of Ann Woolmer, our administrator, and the members of the History Committee who have worked on the programming for today. They will be doing the tours. There's Joanne Barnes, who is here, who was actually the very first president of Lake Park Friends 26 years ago, and Virginia Small, who you heard from yesterday, who is such an able and interesting historian and contributes so much. So both of them are here. They've helped a lot with this, and I'm grateful to them, and grateful to all of you for being here. I hope you enjoy the day.
While several speakers here have and will speak to Frederick Sr.'s innovations, I would like to speak to his inheritance. This morning, we will consider Frederick Law Olmsted's landscape practice as partly the application of landscape theory which developed in Britain over the long 18th century. Olmsted acknowledged that there were three basic categories of landscape: the beautiful, the picturesque, and the sublime. One might consider each landscape form, beginning historically with the beautiful, as a progression toward forms more and more true to nature itself. These categories were defined by theorists and practitioners in 18th and early 19th century Britain, who in turn were informed by developments within landscape painting. If we take a moment to consider that modern landscape design was deeply rooted from the beginning in 18th century aesthetic theory and landscape painting, we will begin to gain a better appreciation for park design as itself an art form, comparable to oil painting, and just as worthy of preservation for posterity. While Olmsted was a student of Enlightenment theory, he was never a slave to it, adapting English aesthetic principles to North American needs in light of his own firsthand experience with a wide variety of natural and designed environments. At the start of the 18th century, Britain was largely a slave to theories and models of garden design from continental Europe. The formal, ornamental, geometric design of the gardens at Louis XIV's Palace of Versailles served as a landscaping ideal for royal and aristocratic estates throughout the European world. This was also true for Britain, as with the example of the Longleat House and Gardens in Wiltshire, completed in 1700. By the early 18th century, as Britain began to gain the upper hand in its long military struggles with France, Britain gained in cultural self-confidence. In his 1731 poem Of Taste, or an epistle to Lord Burlington, English poet Alexander Pope urged his aristocratic patron not to emulate extravagant French models in landscaping his estate, but take his guidance from nature itself. Pope wrote, "Consult the genius of the place in all, that tells the waters or to rise or fall, or helps the ambitious hill the heavens to scale, or scoops in circling theaters the vale, calls in the country, catches opening glades, joins willing woods, and varies shades from shades, now breaks or now directs thin tending lines, paints as you plant and as you work designs." Well, Pope advised Lord Burlington to follow the naturally occurring contours and features of the land in landscape design. Architect and painter William Kent was busy attempting just that. His landscaping of Burlington's Chiswick House was one of the first great expressions of the English natural landscape, developed in opposition to French formalism. It followed the principles of the beautiful style of landscape. The beautiful landscape was largely synonymous with the pastoral. The pastoral landscape typically took the form of a broad, open, gently undulating field of closely cropped grass, with that monotony broken by such elements as a copse of trees, a quiet stream, or a lake reflecting the trees and sky, and also a classical temple or monument serving as a focal point. Truth be told, in seeking inspiration for the grounds of Chiswick House, William Kent turned less to the English landscape itself than to a painter of landscapes, and not an English painter of landscapes, but, well, a Frenchman, the 17th century artist Claude Lorraine. And Lorraine's paintings, in turn, did not depict England, or even France, but Italy, and a fantasized and classicized Italy at that. One can detect the Frenchman's influence upon the new vogue for the pastoral landscape, often with neoclassical follies. Let's see. You can see it immediately, right? We can see how Kent's design of the grounds at Chiswick House, as well as the landscaping and the folly at Stourhead, the estate of Henry Orr, were inspired by Lorraine's oil painting Aeneas at Delos. In a break with French ornamental garden design along with Baroque architecture, the grounds at Chiswick House, Stourhead, and many other Georgian estates incorporated the native flora and topology of the English landscape as a complement to neoclassical architecture. You can see the Pantheon in the distance there. But as with Lorraine's 17th century paintings, these early 18th century landscapes were meant to resemble not British nature, but Greek myths, a classical Arcadia in which gently rolling pasture was cropped closely by grazing sheep and cattle, and tended with little labor by lugubrious shepherds. If one's goal is a landscape design that is true to the land, these English pastoral landscapes were an advancement on formalism. But their designers were not yet committed to Pope's principle, consult the genius of the place in all. William Kent's student, Lancelot Brown, wedded this principle to the English pastoral landscape tradition. While developing Lord Cobham's estate at Stowe, Kent and his assistant Brown replaced formal gardens with the planting of thousands of trees native to Britain, such as beech, elm, and Scotch pine. Brown assumed responsibility as head gardener at Stowe in 1742 at the age of 26. From 1747 to 1749, he developed Grecian Valley to showcase the Temple of Concord and Victory, which you see in that image there. Brown removed trees to open through the woods a long and broad corridor of meadow framed by groves of trees. While the native trees were planted elsewhere at the estate, he brought in trees more fitting for the temple. Brown became known to his clients as Capability for his aptitude in assessing the capability of their land for improvements. He took very seriously the existing topology, factoring in the natural contours of the land. Central to his landscape design was consulting the genius of the place. Accordingly, Brown favored existing trees and native plantings, but he was comfortable moving trees from one place to another for effect, and he was not above using foreign trees if they suited his purposes. At Highclere Castle, an estate which served as the film set for Downton Abbey, he planted Lebanon cedars both for visual interest and to obscure the house upon the visitor's approach, so that they would have the aha moment of seeing the castle upon clearing the massive trees. Similar to the design style of Kent, his broad sweeps of pasture were meant to evoke a sense of serenity and peacefulness in the viewer, but another part of the beautiful style was to generate delight. As with the Highclere Castle cedars, Brown excavated lakes and winding rivers, lined with stands of trees, to surprise viewers when they turned the bend to see the main house. He was a master of the natural landscape, but his version of natural remained pastoral and neoclassical. He freely rearranged nature, whether trees, earth, or water, to achieve the desired artistic presentation and emotional effect. Capability Brown's work over the middle decades of the century brought the English pastoral landscape to a state of perfection. It was widely accepted in Britain that the English natural landscape had surpassed French formal landscapes in beauty. In his 1770 Observations on Modern Gardening, English civil servant Thomas Whately exulted, "Gardening, in the perfection to which it has been lately brought in England, is entitled to a place of considerable rank among the liberal arts. It is as superior to landscape painting as a reality to a representation. It is an exertion of fancy, a subject for taste, and being released now from the restraints of regularity, meaning formalism, and enlarged beyond the purposes of domestic convenience, the most beautiful, the most simple, the most noble scenes of nature are all within its province." Capability Brown's perfection of the pastoral garden, particularly as it informed the early work of Humphrey Repton, inspired Frederick Law Olmsted profoundly. The beautiful or pastoral style of garden was the category most often implemented by Olmsted. Such a landscape was characterized by openness and spaciousness. Brown took inspiration from such, Olmsted took inspiration from such designed pastures as Brown's Grecian Valley. Olmsted and his partner, English architect Calvert Vaux, considered the pastoral form as ideal for a new park in Brooklyn, as we see here. It consists of combinations of trees, standing singly or in groups, and casting their shadows over broad stretches of turf, or repeating their beauty by reflection upon the calm surface of pools. And the predominant associations are in the highest degree tranquilizing and graceful. We know of no other landscape effects that can be commanded within the limitations fixed by the conditions of this site, which experience shows to be more desirable in a town park than these. Let's see. While inspired by European models and the aesthetic theory behind them, Olmsted was also guided by his own experience, both extrospective and introspective. On a journey to West Texas with his brother in 1854, he observed a broad prairie with little groupings of trees, which resembled the pastoral landscapes he had seen in England. In riding across the prairie, Olmsted felt relaxation, peacefulness, and tranquility. He believed that the pastoral landscape was the category most urgently needed by urban residents as an antidote to the nervousness and stress wrought by living among bustling crowds and loud traffic while surrounded by tall buildings. Ideally, the broad, open sweep of a pastoral landscape would seem to retreat into the distance, like the West Texas prairie and like Brown's Grecian Valley. The long meadow of Brooklyn's Prospect Park, as we call it today, provided Olmsted with the opportunity to achieve this vision. No American city dwellers had greater need for the mental refreshment of the pastoral landscape than New Yorkers. Arcadian vistas were, however, certainly not native to New York City, so Frederick Law Olmsted decided to invent them. Like Capability Brown, he transformed the barren site designated for Central Park, introducing trees, shrubs, and water features where there had been no natural beauty before. He did, however, consult the genius of the place, building around the existing contours of the land and making effective use of the native schist available on the site. The sheep meadow in Central Park is one of the best known examples of a beautiful or pastoral landscape within an Olmsted park. To achieve the desired effect of closely cropped turf, Olmsted introduced sheep. But no lugubrious Roman shepherds. And alas, no nymphs. One can find similar pastoral landscapes outside of Manhattan and Brooklyn, such as Behringer Hill at Louisville's Cherokee Park, and closer to home, Milwaukee's Riverside Park, as well as Washington Park. Gently flowing streams and still, smooth pools of water were integral to the English pastoral landscape. Olmsted shared Capability Brown's skill in designing artificial lakes and channels to seem naturally occurring, as with the lagoons and islands of Milwaukee's Washington Park. Now that we can see Olmsted's application of the English pastoral landscape in American urban parks, let's take a step back again to 18th century England. By the 1760s, Brown's natural garden style had displaced ornate formalism as the dominant landscape in Britain. Based on classical ideals of harmony and restraint, and Enlightenment ideals of rationality and refinement, Capability Brown's pastoral landscapes were designed to generate a sense of tranquility and peacefulness in their viewers. After Brown's death in 1783, a new generation of landscape theorists and practitioners wanted to make room for a wider range of emotional states, and they began considering new categories of landscape. English clergyman William Gilpin popularized the term picturesque in his travel writings of the 1780s and his 1794 Remarks on Forest Scenery, and Sir Euvdale Price published his Essays on the Picturesque that same year. By this term, Price and Gilpin meant a landscape that possessed the pleasing qualities of a well-composed landscape painting. And they both specifically cited, you guessed it, Claude Lorraine. He's still with us, going back to the well. In Forest Scenery, Gilpin praised the many improvements of the ingenious Mr. Brown. Bless you. But he and Price both advocated for greater variety and contrast in landscape forms than Brown provided. Bless you. Instead of just close cropped turf, there should also be shaggy undergrowth. Instead of just gentle slopes and still ponds, there should be rugged terrain and waterfalls. Instead of neoclassical follies and statues, there should be ancient elms, beeches, and oaks. Whereas Brown aimed at the beautiful in his design, and statesman Edmund Burke had expounded upon the difference between the beautiful and the sublime, Euvdale Price characterized the picturesque as a station between the beautiful and the sublime. While the sublime evokes astonishment and the beautiful evokes love, the picturesque, Price contended, evokes curiosity. Over the 20 years after Brown's death, Humphrey Repton emerged as the dominant English landscape designer. As he opened his Sketches and Hints on Landscape Gardening, all rational improvement of grounds is necessarily founded on a due attention to the character and situation of the place to be improved. Repton obeyed what he called repeatedly the genius of the place, preparing designs which fit the topography, hydrology, and flora of each specific site. In the Red Book he arranged for each project, Repton provided a watercolor illustration of each part of the property in its present condition. By turning a paper flap, the paper revealed the changes he proposed making to it. I was on a research trip in Virginia last week, and they had an 1805 original edition of the book. It was gilt-edged. It had the red books embedded in it. It was one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen. It was a real privilege to get to look at it. His landscaping included pastoral panoramas and even the occasional neoclassical folly. But because he was committed to preserving the essence of each site intact, Repton's landscapes included many picturesque elements. Repton worked with the existing contour of the land, incorporated rough places and deep places where Brown might have smoothed out or filled in, and took pains to retain old trees that had survived agricultural improvements. In this image from his Red Book for Mulgrave Castle, he showed how the removal of just one tree transformed an existing landscape. So this is the before, and you can see the flap. And then you open it up, and with just a few changes, whammo, you have this beautiful vista, and with the castle up on the hill. Just not massive changes, but just a few strategic changes, and it's completely transformed. Like Brown, he was Like Brown, he was a master of hydraulics, designing serpentine streams and waterfalls in such a way as to appear naturally occurring. A Repton landscape might, for instance, feature forest paths winding around boulders that were shaggy with mosses and ferns, and then leading to a waterfall which was human-made but looked primeval. This is from Mulgrave Castle. I've got to get over there. It's so beautiful. In Frederick Law Olmsted's lifetime, American landscape painters, particularly those of the Hudson River School, like Asher Durand and Martin John Head, advanced picturesqueness as a desirable form of natural beauty. While Durand here, on the left, painted a rugged scene in the Catskill Mountains, Head represented a thickly jungled and shadowy landscape from Central America. I think this is Nicaragua. Isolated wilderness stirred the American artist's fascination with the picturesque. Sharing that fascination, Olmsted's 1863 visit to Central America while on his long journey to California impressed him profoundly. From Panama to a friend, he wrote from Panama to a friend exultantly, "I have never had a more complete satisfaction and delight of my love of nature than I had yesterday in crossing the isthmus." He described the terrain as rocky, and all the rock is covered with verdure. In designing Central Park's Ramble and River Road, he had attempted to replicate the effect of a tropical rainforest, or what he imagined it would look like from paintings like Head's. But having experienced the tropics firsthand, he found his first efforts with the Ramble inadequate. Olmsted strained to identify temperate zone trees and plants which might substitute for the stands of banana plants which delighted him. Is there nothing which would give something of that exquisite, transparent, glaucous green? While Olmsted noted that the open meadows of Central Park, let's take a look at it. The open meadows of Central Park were meant to produce a sense of rest and tranquility. His hike through a tropical landscape stirred excitement. The source of this delight, Olmsted concluded, was a sense of the superabundant creative power, infinite resource, and liberality of nature, adding, the root of which seems to be a profound sense of the Creator's bountifulness. A devoted follower of Humphrey Repton, Olmsted designed picturesque landscapes as one component of an urban park meant to contrast with the pastoral landscape. Tall, viney trees and close, dense plantings would generate a play of light and shadow meant to evoke a sense of mystery in the viewer. Meanwhile, paths bending around thick stands of trees and undergrowth, boulders, or around ravines and dells would elicit curiosity, wonder, and surprise. If Central Park's ramble is the best known of his picturesque landscapes, others include Big Rock at Louisville's Cherokee Park and the rocky descent into the Milwaukee River and Riverside Park. Like Repton, Olmsted obeyed the genius of the place and saw his role as that of enhancing pre-existing nature and bringing out its true essence. While Repton was the practitioner who influenced him the most, Olmsted found his guiding aesthetic principles in Price's essays on the picturesque and Gilpin's travel books. As Charles Beveridge observed, he considered them the basic texts for gaining an understanding of scenery and landscape design. They were, he admitted, the work of a previous century, but Olmsted found that nothing written later was so effective and reliable in stimulating the exercise of judgment in matters of my art. In later years, when Olmsted took apprentices into his office for professional training, he gave them copies of these books and said, "You are to read these seriously, as a student of law would read Blackstone." Extrospection and introspection on trips to places like West Texas and Panama taught him the emotional power of natural scenery. And the 18th century English landscape designers and theorists provided the principles and models which guided his work. The fundamental goal of Olmsted's art was creating, enhancing, or preserving natural scenery. He applied the concept scenery only to a field of vision in which there is either considerable complexity of light and shadow near the eye or obscurity of detail further away. Olmsted worked mainly with picturesque scenery, which falls in that first category, and pastoral scenery, which fell in the second. But he was also concerned with the third category of landscape, the sublime. Where pastoral landscapes were open meadows and still waters, and the picturesque consisted of rough terrain and shadowy woods, the sublime landscape consisted of awesome natural wonders, such as tall mountains, canyons, and the vastness of the sea, observed at a great distance. When Olmsted applied the term sublime to a naturally occurring landscape, he was again firmly anchored conceptually in 18th century Enlightenment culture. In his 1757 book, A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and the Beautiful, Anglo-Irish statesman Edmund Burke posited that the beautiful landscape evokes love in the viewer. Of the sublime, he wrote, "The passion caused by the great and sublime in nature is astonishment. And astonishment is that state of the soul in which all its motions are suspended, with some degree of horror. The mind is so entirely filled with this object that it cannot entertain any other, nor reason on that object which fills it. Astonishment is the effect of the sublime in its highest degree." You just have this sense of being completely overwhelmed. Let's see. In his 1785 Notes in the State of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson described his personal experience with a natural bridge, one of Virginia's geological marvels, in similarly Burkean terms. Indeed, I got the Founding Fathers in there after all, so yeah. So here's a painting from 1860 of the natural bridge, from Olmsted's period. "The natural bridge, the most sublime of nature's works, though not comprehended under the present head, must not be pretermitted. It is on the ascent of a hill which seems to have been cloven through its length by some great convulsion. Though the sides of this bridge are provided in some parts with a parapet of fixed rocks, yet few men have resolution to walk to them and look over into the abyss. You involuntarily fall on your hands and feet, creep to the parapet, and peep over it." Just have that for a visual image of Thomas Jefferson, his hands and knees, but okay. "Looking down from this height about a minute gave me a violent headache. This painful sensation is relieved by a short but pleasing view of the Blue Ridge, along the fissure downwards, and upwards by that of the short hills, which, with the Purgatory Mountain, is a divergence from the North Ridge. And descending then to the valley below, the sensation becomes delightful in the extreme. It is impossible for the emotions arising from the sublime to be felt beyond what they are here. So beautiful an arch, so elevated, so light and a springing, as it were, up to heaven, the rapture of the spectator is really indescribable. Exclamation point. You don't get a lot of exclamation points from Jefferson, but you get it here. Yeah. As Jefferson's commentary suggests, the intellectuals of the American Enlightenment imported this concept of the sublime landscape, and it informed the American art of the early 19th century, extending into Olmsted's lifetime. Fine examples of the sublime in American oil painting are Albert Bierstadt's Yosemite Valley and Frederick Edwin Church's Niagara Falls. While Olmsted was familiar with the Enlightenment writings and American paintings of the sublime, his fullest understanding of this aesthetic principle was, like Jefferson, a matter of direct personal experience. As with the West Texas pastoral and the Panamanian picturesque, Olmsted could testify to the power of the sublime by witnessing it in California. On his first visit to California to work for the Mariposa Mining Company, he entered Bear Valley, describing it to his wife on October 15th, 1863. It is far more barren and rude, but becomes grand, not picturesque, but sublime in no contemptible degree. You see nothing but steep mountains, the lower Sierra Nevada almost completely bare of trees. You can see that on the bottom right here. That's pretty cool, huh? While he found the high mountains reminiscent of the heathery peaks of Scotland, Olmsted descended a ravine to the Merced River, finding there a view up the valley of the Merced, which was still finer, El Capitan, the white cliff of Yosemite being seen in the distance. Olmsted wrote much less about sublime landscapes than the pastoral or picturesque because he felt that a human designer could not create the sublime. Naturally occurring and God-given wonders were beyond Olmsted's power. His task as the landscape architect was to provide visitors with access to a sublime landscape in such a way that it would not be damaged. Hence, Olmsted's campaigns for the preservation of natural scenery at Yosemite and at Niagara. His Free Niagara campaign called for free public access to the scenery of Niagara Falls and the rapids of the Niagara River. He pushed for the purchase and removal of any ugly human structures which distracted from the grandeur of the place, such as sawmills and tourist traps, and he designed Niagara Falls State Park to enable visitors to access the rapids directly and experience the sublime firsthand, and perhaps in this way grow closer to God. In one of 19th century America's greatest paintings, Thomas Cole's The Oxbow, the artist represents all three landscapes in one frame: the craggy, picturesque mountaintop, the pastoral valley stretching out below, and the sweeping vista darkened by an approaching storm, which gives the effect of the sublime. At least that's my interpretation. While Olmsted worked with all three categories of landscape in one mode or another, I know firsthand of only one Olmsted park which, similar to Cole's Oxbow, combines all three to spectacular effect. I refer, of course, to Lake Park. Like most Olmsted parks, Lake Park consists mainly of the pastoral. We may start our virtual tour using the North Point Lighthouse as a focal point in this broad sweep of closely cropped and lightly treed turf. Before proceeding over the Lion Bridge, we can catch just a glimpse through the brush of Lake Michigan beyond the park. We will now cross over a ravine by way of the Lion Bridge. If we continue down the walkway, we'll see the sweeping expanse of a pastoral landscape used as a golf course. But I'm really a fan of the picturesque, so I'd prefer to turn to the east and descend the steps, rough-hewn by the WPA, which line a little waterfall. New Yorkers may boast of the Ramble, but to my mind, the Lake Park waterfall is a worthy rival in picturesqueness, and it is one of my favorite places in Milwaukee. If we turn around, if we can pull our eyes away from the waterfall and turn around, winding footpaths provide access through shaded woods and up overgrown hills, or in this case, alongside a little brook. Yes, it's human-made, but it looks primeval to me. Oop. Let's see. A WPA footbridge enables us to cross the brook safely and delve deeper into rough terrain overgrown with shaggy ground cover. As the footpath bends around the contours of the hill and curves back toward the ravine we crossed earlier, we catch another glimpse of the trees of something grand. Emerging abruptly out of the shadowy verdure of Olmsted's picturesque landscape and into full sunlight, we find Lake Michigan stretched out before us, receding into the distance. Having passed in a classically Olmstedian sequence of scenery, we move from the pastoral to the picturesque and at last to the sublime. And free public access to this sublime landscape is why Olmsted designed Lake Park, just as he had designed Niagara Falls State Park before. In his 1871 plan for Chicago South Park, Olmsted remarked about Lake Michigan, "There is but one object of scenery near Chicago of special grandeur or sublimity, and that, the lake, can be made by artificial means no more grand or sublime. Humans cannot create the sublime, nor even improve upon it any more than they can improve upon the divine." Functioning like a priest of nature, Olmsted used park design as a form of intercession, providing visitors with effective access to the pastoral, yes, and the picturesque, but most importantly, in the case of our Lake Park, to the sublime. Oh yes, and if you do like formal landscapes, Olmsted provided the grand staircase, so you're set there. What can I say? Lake Park has it all. Thank you.